Hello, Commodore fans, and welcome into episode 15 of the Dore Report, presented by the great folks at Alaco Hardwood Flooring. If you need a hardwood flooring job done within your house, be sure to contact them at their website, alacohardwoodflooring.com, and Jimmy Alaco will get the job done for you. It's so great to be talking college football again. Week 0 is behind us, and it's now time to talk about Week 1. And my special guest here on the Dore Report is Greg Arias. He is the SI.com site publisher for Vanderbilt Athletics. He was previously covering the Tennessee Titans, but he'll begin this season with Vanderbilt football with covering the team. And Greg, thank you so much for taking the time to join us on the show.
Well, thanks for having me on today. I appreciate the invite.
Yes, sir. And I want to first start with, I saw on your Twitter where you were born and raised here in Middle Tennessee. Did you have a college football fan allegiance growing up?
Yes, and probably most people won't like it. I'm actually a University of Alabama alumnus.
Oh, okay.
Long history of SEC-dom. I'll say this, and you'll see this on my bio when the site gets up and running, which, by the way, tomorrow the site will be up, and I'll have my first bits of content to go up tomorrow. But I don't know if you remember a few years ago when a certain former coach, who shall remain nameless, but he's in the middle of a lawsuit now at another university, was in Nashville. At the end of the press conference, the Music City Bowl, he stopped the conference and hugged a gentleman in that conference. I don't know if you've seen that video, but that guy was my dad. My dad is
really?
Yes, my dad's been a Vanderbilt fan since I was a young child. And, of course, everything Dad did, I kind of had to go the opposite way. He's a Yankees fan, so I'm a Braves fan. He's a Vanderbilt fan, so I went to Alabama. But that aside, a long history in Middle Tennessee, and certainly Vanderbilt as a person in the SEC when I was in school was my second favorite behind, obviously, Alabama. Have a lot of friends that played at Vanderbilt that are a little older. I don't know any of the current crop of Commodores, but looking forward to meeting some of those guys here in the next few days once the credentialing process with the university is finished. But I do have a history with Vanderbilt.
Oh yeah, I'm glad you're covering Vanderbilt football. I've been a Vanderbilt fan all my life. And like your dad, my dad, he sort of taught me to be a Vandy fan. I didn't switch to Bama, but I stayed with Vandy. But and before we start talking Vanderbilt, I just you did mention a little bit, but tell our listeners what all you will be doing with SI.com and Vanderbilt this year.
Pretty much everything. We're going to have a presence, hopefully, in most every sport. Obviously, the major three of football, basketball, both men's and women's, and then baseball, which is the big thing at Vanderbilt right now. Obviously, Coach Corbin and those guys are just incredible what they're doing, and that's going to be fun. Hoping to get an opportunity to go to Omaha with them. Certainly would like to do things with football and basketball, but right now, when you look at the state of Vanderbilt Athletics as a whole, baseball obviously closest to championship level at this point, so certainly that's a bucket list thing to get to go to Omaha with that. But we're going to be going across all platforms. You won't have as much golf, obviously. It's a little hard to do that. Cross country, things. And I don't. Vanderbilt doesn't have a track program, do they?
No, they do not.
I'm going to step on myself here. But we're going to try to give every sport at Vanderbilt that we can as much coverage as possible. And now, granted, I'm a one-man show right now, but there are plans to add other people to the mix to write for the site. We're talking to Vanderbilt about some interns to help us do some things, because once basketball gets started, you've got men's and women's. It's going to stretch me a little bit, but we're going to do the most that we can starting out, and then grow with this thing and get to the point where hopefully we can be, if not the top, certainly one of the go-to places for every Vanderbilt Commodore fan throughout not just Middle Tennessee, but across the country, to be able to find out information on Vanderbilt athletics.
Yes, I actually misspoke there. They do have women's track. They do not have men's, though. Yeah, we'll be sure to get that right there. But I want to start and dive into to this game we got going on this Saturday night. Georgia Bulldogs coming into town, ranked number 3 in the country. Obviously, there's going to be a ton of Georgia fans in that stadium. 70% of the tickets sold on Vivid Seats so far were bought by Georgia fans. What are your thoughts on the percentage, I guess, that you think will be Georgia fans in that stadium, and how that might affect the game?
Well, it's sad from a Vanderbilt standpoint, but it's not really surprising at this point in time. And I go back to just a couple of years ago. Alabama came in, and obviously it was kind of a similar situation. And that's the thing that I think Coach Mason and Vanderbilt Athletics as a whole, with the exception of baseball, and of course they don't have as big a facility, so they don't have as many seats to fill. But I think that's what they're fighting, is trying to get to the point where, these winning teams that they've not been championship level teams, but they've been winning teams. They've got the bowl games. They've had good seasons. They've been solid. They've beaten UT. They're laying the groundwork for something. But that, I think, is the big step that is in front of them, is to get where they're 50-50 with Georgia, with Alabama, with LSU when these power programs come in, and then hopefully get to the point where it's 60-40 and 70-30 and 80-20. And a good mix where that you've got Vanderbilt fans in that stadium. Of course, with the new athletic director there, Malcolm Turner, he's got some work to do. And I think one of the things that could help that would be some stadium renovations and upgrades that I know have been talked about, but as of yet have not been finalized or put into place as far as getting those things done. So I think that could help. But that's the thing that they're fighting. You've got to do that to get over the top for your football program. Otherwise, when those types of schools, Florida, UT, they come into Nashville, they're going to dominate the stadium.
Yeah, you tweeted out yesterday that you've heard a rumor that Riley Neal will start Saturday night. I think Brent Doherty tweeted out there, I think with this battle going on, there's been a lot of talk about back and forth about both guys. A couple of days ago, I thought it was going to be Deuce, and then now my heart's telling me Riley. So I'm just ready to be there in the stadium and see who's under center. In your mind, who do you think will start Saturday night?
I think it'll be Riley Neal to take the first snap. He's the more experienced guy. And I think that for Derrick Mason, and certainly the couple of people that I talked to that have a little bit of information that kind of put me in the direction that I went with that, and Brent also had the same thing. I think he's looking at that early on in the ball game, because obviously Georgia's going to come in a heavy favorite. A really talented football team with a lot of veteran players. It was just 2 years ago they played for a national championship. Of course, last year they were in the SEC championship game. And I think that's why he will go there, just the experience. I think we'll probably see both guys play in the ball game. And, in fact, who knows, Deuce Wallace may wind up playing more. But I just think Neal, he wants to get the game off on a good note with a guy with a lot of experience, which is what you're going to get from him. More experience, I should say. Yeah,
I agree, Greg. And I look at it this way. You got a guy, a fifth year senior grad transfer coming in from Ball State, a guy who, as you mentioned, has a ton of experience transferring in. His goal is to start at Vandy. And I know Deuce Wallace has emerged onto the scene, but I think what Derrick Mason has been doing is just playing with all of us. And he said he isn't, but he really is. Riley Neal has been the guy, I guarantee, in his mind for a while. And I know he just now told Riley and Deuce, but I think what it was is him making sure Deuce – I know Deuce won't transfer, but making sure Deuce stays focused and engaged and on his toes, because you never know when he'll go into the game and have to produce,
Absolutely. And again, I think we see both of them. I think you want to get some experience in a setting like this against a team that's top 3, 4 in the country, certainly in Georgia, and get that experience for Deuce as well. But I just think it's the veteran that's going to get the call out of the gate. And who knows what happens if Neal goes well and Vanderbilt's moving the football, because certainly he has some offensive pieces around him with Lipscomb and with Pinckney and certainly Keyshawn Vaughn. They've got some guys. Those 3 guys can match up and play at Georgia's level. There's some other guys as well, but those are the 3 obvious ones that stand out that are going to have to be big for either one of these quarterbacks. But certainly those guys can do some things to help the quarterback. And I think if you see those things, Vandy certainly has an opportunity to stay in this ball game and play. Now, I'm not going to sit here and tell you I think they'll ultimately win it in the end. Georgia, obviously, the favorite in this thing, and I would be crazy to go against that. but certainly I don't think that it could be as one-sided as people think if a few things come together for Vanderbilt and some of the guys in the offensive and defensive line step up and play some good football.
You mentioned the talent on Georgia. Vandy's got, as you mentioned too, a lot of talent on their side. What's the matchup you're really looking forward to watching the most? The Vandy offense against the Georgia defense, or do you like that Georgia offense against the Vanderbilt defense?
I want to see the Vanderbilt offense because, as I mentioned, Lipscomb and Pinckney and Vaughn are all guys that I know from having covered the NFL and done things there that I'm really high on as far as future NFL players. So I think Vandy has more of an upside there, if you will. Now, that's not to discredit any of the defensive guys. And keep in mind, I'm new to this, so I'm still getting my feet wet, learning a lot about the Vanderbilt players. So I have not done as much research on the defensive guys as of yet as I will throughout the next couple of days before the game. But I just want to see Vandy's offense because I think Vandy's offense is going to carry them certainly early on in the season. To me, with a new quarterback, with those talented guys, they've got to be able to do some things because Vandy doesn't have the depth to leave a defense out there. We've seen that throughout the course of the years where they've had some of the great defenses with Winborn and some of the other guys that have come through Vanderbilt. And they played and with great high-level defenses, but when the offense can't produce, those guys get worn down. So I think offense is where I want to see Saturday night against Georgia.
Well, Greg, Vanderbilt beat Georgia in 2013 at home. That was their last victory over Georgia at home. But they also beat Georgia in Athens in Kirby Smart's first year in 2015. So I think a victory this Saturday night is obviously going to be tough, as you mentioned. But for Vanderbilt to win this game, this may seem a little crazy to think about, but, I think they'll keep it close in the first, 3 quarters or so. What do they have to do to keep this game close into the fourth quarter?
Well, it's cliche in coach speak, but they have to take care of the football. You cannot turn the football over, give Georgia extra opportunities. You have to cut out the penalties. You can't have the holding penalties and things that put you behind the chains and force you into third and long and second and long situations where Georgia and those athletes on defense can come after you. If you do those two things, I think certainly the offense can do some things in this ball game. Obviously, I think special teams are important in the punting game and kickoffs and the hidden yardage that can be found there. You have to limit Georgia's big play ability on special teams. If you do that, and if the offense doesn't have the penalties, takes care of the football, I think you can be in this thing in the fourth quarter and maybe have a shot at it.
All right, Vandy fans love hearing that. And, I want to ask you a little bit about Georgia now because we've been focusing a lot about Vandy. But Georgia, obviously, last season, they make it all the way to Atlanta to play Alabama. But Jalen Hurts comes in the game and wins. So they miss out on the playoff. But then they lose to Texas. Was it the Sugar Bowl?
Yes.
Yeah, they lost in the Sugar Bowl to Texas, so season ended on a down note. But they're heading into this season hungry. In terms of this season's potential for Georgia, do you think they have what it takes to beat Bama and even be maybe the 1 or 2 seed in the playoff?
Well, I think they do, obviously, and it starts with them with Jake Fromm. They've got an experienced veteran quarterback coming back that's been through the wars. He's been to a national championship game. Yes, he didn't play as well as he would like to. Obviously, they didn't win. He's been to Atlanta for the SEC championship game a couple of times now. So he's the veteran guy. They've got a lot of talent around him. Obviously, they've got 4- and 5-star youngsters that we may see on Saturday night that we haven't really heard a lot about, other than through the recruiting services. But I think that's where it starts with them. They certainly have the talent. They're going to have size and speed and athleticism all over the field at pretty much every position. The thing that I think might be for them a weakness might be their actual punting, kicking game at this point in time. They've got, from what I've heard now, and again, this is late getting to the party as far as catching up with things, but I talked to a couple of friends down in Georgia, and they've had some issues with the punting game. Now, I say that, and they'll come in and get 60-yarders all night. But that's one area where I think there's some concern for them, and obviously special teams can play a huge part in it. If you shank some punts, do some things like that gives Vanderbilt some opportunities, then it'll be up to Vandy, obviously, to take advantage of anything that Georgia gives them.
Yeah, you said punting is really poor, but the kicking is insane there with the senior Rodrigo Blankenship coming back. I think they call him Hot Rod, so it should be fun to watch there. Real quick here, Greg, before I let you go, I always like to ask our guests for a final score prediction, and I'm not going to say mine until leading up to the game, but I want to hear yours because of your just your insight with the SEC and football in this area in general. So without further ado, Vanderbilt or Georgia this Saturday night?
Oh, me. I just knew you were going to do that. I haven't really sat down and thought about it. It's going to be hard for Vandy to overcome the athleticism. I think they can play in this game and keep it relatively respectable. I obviously have to go with Georgia just because there's so much talent there with this team. I'm going to say 31-14, but I think Vanderbilt has an opportunity in this ball game, and a break here and there could certainly change that. But I think they'll keep it close enough that certainly will be interesting in the fourth quarter, if not even closer than that.
We'll have to see which team comes out. I think it's going to be Georgia as well. I'll give the fans a score a little bit later leading up to the game. But, thank you so much for coming on the show today, Greg. And it should be posted here very shortly. But good luck with your work covering Vanderbilt athletics. The next week or so, we're leading up to Vanderbilt and Georgia. But thanks for taking the time joining the podcast.
Absolutely glad to do it. Just give me a call anytime.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Greg.
All right. Thank you.
That was Greg Arias, SI.com site publisher for Vanderbilt Athletics. He's born and raised in the Middle Tennessee area. He grew up an Alabama fan, even though his dad was a Vanderbilt fan. Interesting little tidbit there. But yeah, great talking with Greg. He will be covering Vanderbilt football this year. He'll be up in the booth, a new writer. Seems like Vanderbilt's getting new writers every day. So you'd love to see that with Vanderbilt athletics on the upswing. I told you I'd give you my score prediction for Vanderbilt and Georgia. I think Georgia wins 35-31. I think it's going to be a shootout. I think Georgia. Actually, no, let's change that. 35-28. I think Vanderbilt scores a late touchdown and then they have a chance at an onside, but don't get it. So I've got Georgia winning 35-28 by a touchdown. So Vanderbilt will cover. Or rather, Georgia will not cover. Georgia will not cover in this game. Vanderbilt and Georgia this Saturday night in Nashville, 6:30 p.m. is the kickoff. Get to your seats early because it's going to be a packed house at Vanderbilt Stadium. If you're not able to go to the game, tune your TV to SEC Network. Cannot wait to get this one going. Tailgating all day will be fun. SEC Nation will be there. First SEC game of the season, Georgia and Vanderbilt. Be there or be square. It's going to be a fun one. Big thanks to Greg Arias, SI.com site publisher for Vanderbilt Athletics. For myself, Billy Derrick, and Greg Arias, you've been listening to episode 15 of the Dore Report, presented by the great folks at Alaco Hardwood Flooring.